Okay, so here we are for the third time. Hopefully the internet works now. I had to restart it. This is so frustrating, but let's go back to what we were talking about. So, we had a question about kids, right? The pronunciation of the D in the word kids. Note that the S is a Z sound here. It's not kids, it's kids. Um, so we have to talk a bit about TS and DZ. And these are usually described as an unreleased T or an unreleased D, and I would very strongly disagree with that. That creates confusion. So what's happening here? Let's talk about the TS because it's easier to hear what's going on. If we say what's, it's, for example, it doesn't have to be apostrophe S. It's just you have a T sound and an S sound next to each other. What's going to happen is we go into the T position, and then we're going to push the S through the T. We don't release the T, so it's commonly described as an unreleased T, but that's not accurate because there is no T. Okay, there's no T of any kind. All you're doing a special kind of S that instead of starting in the normal S position that it just flows out, you're going into the T position and you're pushing the S through that. So it's actually an S that starts from the T position and gets squeezed out. Okay, so there's no actual T there. That's an illusion. What's, it's, okay. With kids, this is DZ. Now with the DZ combination, what's going to happen is now D and Z are voiced, right? That's one reason the S is voiced here, because of the voice of the D. And Z is the voiced version of S. So just like with the T and the S, you're going to go into that position of the T or D. It's the same place at the top, not touching the teeth. And you're going to push the Z through that position. So you do start in the D position, but there's no D. Okay, it's not kids or anything like that. You just go here and then you release the Z, not the D. You release the Z. So there's the illusion of a D or illusion of a T if it's voiceless, but there's no actual T or D sound there. And I think that's really important because it clears up some confusion. And again, this is why I want you guys to focus on your ears, because if you listen to what's, you see a T, you see an S, you expect there to be a T sound based on your eyes, and normally there is a T sound there, right? Whether it's a stop or an actual T, what, right? But in this case, if you really listen, there is no T there at all, no kind of T. What's, or in kids, there's no D, kids, kids. You're just starting from that special closed position. So that was one question we had this week. And let's see here. Hopefully that makes sense. But come on. So we had another question about the aspiration or not aspiration of the middle sound in cases like these. And what's happening here is the we have a rule here that English hates three consonant sounds together, usually. And so what we tend to do is if you have three consonant sounds together, not just spelling, but actual sounds, we're going to drop the middle one. And in this case, we have an S and then a consonant and then an S. So how do we do that? Well, the way we normally do that, number one, it's important to know that if you do say the K or the P or the T in these cases, they're not aspirated because they're only aspirated at the, which means there's breath instead of right. They're only aspirated or strong at the start of a stressed syllable. Okay, so these are not aspirated; they're just k, p, t. If you were to say them, like if you're emphasizing or you're speaking really clearly for some reason, um, then you just say each sound. So if we say like asks, how you do. You start the S, you go into the K, and then you go right back into the S. It's pretty easy. If you do SPS, so like if I say, I don't know, lisps. Lisp is a word you might not know. You can look that up, but lisps. Or if I say with STS, lasts, right? It lasts a long time. Lasts. So here again, that TS, just like we saw with what's or its, there's no actual T there. There's the illusion of the T as we close up, but then push that S back through the T. So that's a little bit of a special case where there actually is no T there, but it's following the same type of idea as the other two. Now, that's the way you say it clearly. Okay, that's not the normal way we pronounce this combination because, again, we like to drop the middle consonant sound if there's 3 consonant sounds in a row. Now, having 2 of the same sounds around that middle consonant makes it a little tricky, but there's a way we do that. So, for example, instead of saying asks, right, what we can do, good try, gamer boy. Let's see here. Do that one. Okay. So, sorry, I had to deal with a troll there. So, what was I saying? Yeah, so instead of saying, hello, Yuko, welcome to the chat. We had some technical difficulties, so here we are now. Feel free to ask questions. How are you, by the way? I'm just talking about some comments we had this week. But if we say asks, right, instead of doing that, what you can do is you can either do a super like light, almost like a half a K, where you sort of bring the tongue not all the way into the K position. And that will create sort of the illusion that you're heading towards the K and create a little bit of a change in the S sound. And then you go back into the S sound, or you can just sort of adjust your breath really quick and push an S back out. There's a couple different ways to do it, but we would say ass, ass, ass. See, asks. If I do the back of my tongue, asks. It's like I'm just almost barely touching it, just manipulates the airflow, and then I go back into that S, right? And so that makes the sound of like 2 S's together. We're not trying to hold the S. That's not going to be right here. Or with lisps, there you have to do it a little bit different because it involves the lips. And so with the P, what we'll do is, again, in order to sort of create that manipulation of how the air is flowing, instead of doing a full P sound, we'll kind of get close to the P and then open back up and keep the S going. So like, so I'm not actually ever closing, I'm just holding that S, right? So lisps, lisps. That creates the illusion of that sort of P sound there and allows us to sort of actually drop the P because we're not actually pronouncing it. In the case of lasts, that one, again, you just don't want to close completely. You can kind of go just make a little change like you're going to hit the T, or you can just adjust your breath. Lasts, lasts, lasts. That's all you're doing. What I'm doing is I'm sort of doing the S, and then I'm kind of like moving it out and moving it back in. That's all I'm doing. Okay, keeping that breath flowing. So it can be a little tricky, but in normal speech, normal speed speech, and especially in fast speech, that's what we do. The only time that you're actually going to pronounce the sound in between is if you have a special reason to be speaking more slowly, more clearly, maybe you're emphasizing or enunciating or whatever. It's not part of normal speech to actually say that middle sound. So if you want to sound natural or native-like, you have to do that in normal speech. If you just want to sound clear, then of course you can fully pronounce all the sounds and it's it's okay. Like you'll be understood very nicely. So anyway, um, we had a couple other questions, but I don't think any of them were. Let's see. Oh yeah, more about the linking of T after a consonant. Yuko, I'm currently practicing O sounds like in. Okay, well those aren't O sounds. um, but when I like in good or would, but when I record myself, it sounds a little weak compared to native speaker. Okay, so first, which I don't know if you're just writing O because there's an O inside the spelling, but it's not an O sound, right? O is O. The sound here is so there's how are you making this? Yeah, I know, right? How are you doing that? Well, I have a whole lesson on it. I assume you've watched the lesson. If you haven't, you can. I call it the high schwa. It's not actually a schwa sound, but there's a reason I call it that. So if you haven't seen that, I would definitely watch that. I also have an extra practice lesson for that where you can try to listen and repeat. But this is a tricky one. This is probably the most difficult sound for non-native speakers to get, unless you speak a language like German, which has kind of a similar type sound. Um, in fact, this is like the one English sound that I think sounds kind of like Germanic or German in a way. Um, so the reason I call it the high schwa, right? This is part of how I describe how you make how you make it. The schwa is kind of just in the middle of the tongue. It's supposed to be kind of relaxed, whatever. Okay, um, and it's sort of like middle this way, middle this way. It's just very neutral. Uh, uh, uh. Um, it's not the only way to do the schwa. And that's a different problem. But if you go from there, um, and you try to instead of using the middle of your tongue, you're using the back of your tongue, right? And there's a line between, say, the front, the middle, and the back. It's just like a rough line, right? We call the front part of the tongue, the middle part of the tongue, the back of the tongue. So you want to get kind of on that line that separates the back and the middle. And it's like if you take that sort of neutral middle position of the schwa and you instead, now you're not trying to like shift it in your tongue. Don't try to do that, but you're just sort of trying to place that sound instead of in the middle there. You want to try to place it right there. It's just back a little bit more and up a bit more. And it kind of feels to me like the back of my tongue. It's like the front of my tongue stays where it is, but the back of my tongue kind of tries to like push up and forward a little bit, and it creates this little bump. And the high schwa, needs to be like right there on that line before your tongue starts going back down. Uh, uh, uh. Um, that's the way I describe it. I don't know if that helps. Um, but I've worked with the sound a lot with students, and I know some common mistakes. And knowing those common mistakes um, can help you avoid the problem. So if you're trying to do but you're too far back, and or a little too low, it's going to start sounding kind of like an O sound, like uh, uh, uh. Okay, your position is off. You need to go up a bit with the back of the tongue, and you need to push it forward a little bit. Not uh, uh. Um, the schwa and the high schwa, as I call it, are kind of like punch in the stomach sounds, right? If somebody punches you in the stomach, you're probably going to say either the schwa, or you're going to say right? Um, and so it's kind of like that. Like there's force coming up, and how your tongue ends up being. It's like if you're a little too high and a little too far back, it's going to start sounding more like an ooh. So you want to be a little more open. So if you say like, let's see, uh, if you say like ooh, 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 okay, the back of your tongue is too high and it's in the oo position or around the oo position. So then you need to come down a little bit with the back, just adjust it a little bit, maybe open your mouth just a tiny bit. It's a very, very small distance inside the mouth. So don't overdo it. But if you're too far down, it'll sound like oh. If you're too far up, it'll sound like ooh. So you need to be sort of in between those two. And then you need to be a little bit farther forward than both of them. Um, And if you go too far forward, then it might start sounding more like kind of like a schwa, like right? It's also a little lower, but or you might start sounding like like if I do but I just bring up the rest of my tongue here, it goes into uh, er, uh, er. So if the front of your tongue is up, you're going to get more of an sound. Well, it's actually the is in the middle, but you have to bring up your tongue. So you want to make sure that's down and that the back of the tongue is up. So using those the sounds around them to make sure that you don't sound too much like this, it can help you sort of find exactly where the sound is. And then you just got to play with it and get feedback, right? If you don't get feedback of some kind, recording yourself does help, but I would definitely try to get some feedback from a native speaker at least sometimes. And if you don't have some sort of feedback, then it's going to be really, really hard to tell if you're doing the right thing. So, plus the person giving you feedback, if you're actually talking to a person, or if you can hear it on the recording, you'll say, "Oh, that kind of sounds a little more like oh," or "That sounds a little more like ooh," and then you know how to adjust it to try to sound better. So the vowel chart is really useful for that. So I hope that helps, Yuko. If it doesn't, or you have more questions, um, let me know. We can talk more about that. Einsteins, welcome to the chat. What about was and were? I wish I was, or I wish I were. Can I use both? If I was the president, if I were the president. You're welcome, Yuko. This is a good question. So I'm going to tell you what is technically grammatically correct, and then I'm going to tell you how grammar is changing. Okay. The reason you're confused is because this piece of grammar is actually changing, right? Which might be surprising because you think grammar is law, right? Like it can't just change, but grammar changes over time. That's why we no longer speak Old English, which existed a long, long time ago. It changed into Middle English, which changed into Modern English, which Shakespeare spoke. He spoke modern English. I speak modern English also, but I don't speak like Shakespeare because even in modern English, we've had a lot of changes up into the present. So there's always some pieces of grammar, I would say in pretty much any language, that changes very slowly over time. At first, it will sound informal. And then as more and more speakers start to use it, it starts to sound more normal. And then eventually it becomes the grammatically correct way to speak. But that process takes a very, very long time. We're sort of in the middle of that, where it's starting to sound pretty normal. And what's going on here, there's something called, we're going to dip a little bit into a couple technical grammar terms. I'm going to make this nice and easy, but these terms can be useful for understanding what's going on. You don't have to memorize the terms. It's just to sort of categorize what's happening in the grammar here. So we have something called the indicative mood. You don't have to care what a mood is, but indicative, right, to indicate, to point out. It's a fact, right? So if I say I am tall, or the past tense is also indicative, the simple past, I was there, or I will eat tomorrow. Okay, it's not about the tense, that's all indicative, the indicative mood. Then there's something called the subjunctive mood. And subjunctive, right, it's related to the word subjective, right? And in many European languages, there are two completely distinct grammar forms between the normal indicative mood and the subjunctive mood. For example, in Spanish, if you say, um, quiero que, um, is it? I can't even think. I'm so rusty on my Spanish with the subjunctive. It's something that I never quite mastered, and so it takes me a second. Quiero que comas. So I want you to eat, right? Um, in English, we use a different structure here. We say I want you to eat, right? But in Spanish, it's literally I want that you eat. Now, the indicative form in Spanish is comes. If I just say you eat, I would just say tu comes. And that's the normal form. But if I have a desire, I want you to do something, I'm sort of pushing my desire onto you, and I have to use the subjunctive mood. And so comes becomes comas. Um, this used to exist in English. I don't know when, but it used to exist in English as a separate form. Okay, the grammar is still there, but the separate verb form only exists with to be. So, for example, if I say, I ate yesterday. Well, actually, let's make this simple. Let's go, I eat every day. That's just a statement. That's just I eat, right? Now, if I make it past tense, I ate every day. So now it's in the past. Now, if I say, if I ate every day, I would be healthy. So let's say I don't eat every day. That's the fact. That's the indicative. I don't eat every day. But I'm imagining a hypothetical situation, right? Because maybe now, because I don't eat every day, I'm not healthy. And so I think, well, if I ate every day, I would be healthy. So this ate in this sentence, it's not past tense. It looks exactly the same as the simple past tense in the indicative mood, but this is actually the sort of hypothetical present tense or whatever of the subjunctive mood. Um, so all verbs in modern English today, except for to be is the exception still, but all other verbs, even do, have, eat, go, get, whatever, um, if you use this sort of hypothetical situation, you use the subjunctive mood, and the verb will look exactly like the simple past tense. Okay, in the second conditional. If it's third conditional, where it's like an imagine, like a hypothetical past. If I had eaten every day, which this sounds like you're dead, right? You're in heaven now, and you're looking down. And you're like, well, if I had eaten every day, I would have been healthy. Okay, but I didn't eat every day, and so I died. That's the reality. So now it looks like the past perfect, right? But this is also not past perfect. This is just the way that we make the past tense of the subjunctive mood. I know this can be very confusing, which is why I don't want you to care too much about the grammar terms, but I want you to understand that what looks like the simple past or what looks like the past perfect in these two sentences is not past tense, it's not perfect tense, it's the subjunctive mood. Okay. Um, Now, the exception to this is the verb to be. To be, you're supposed to say, if I were you, I wouldn't go. Okay? If I were you. Now, the simple past of to be is I was, you were, he, she, it was, we were, they were. Okay? So it's almost all were. It's just in the third person singular and the first person singular, it's was. Okay? That's the simple past. Now, what's happening is the subjunctive mood. It's supposed to be the grammatically correct version, the traditionally grammatically correct version is supposed to be I were, and subjunctive mood, not simple past, subjunctive mood. I were, you were, he, she, he, she, it were, we were, they were. And you can put if in front of all those. It's not always going to be if necessarily, but you can say if I were, if you were, if he, she, it were, okay, to sort of help separate the two in your mind. That's the grammatically correct way to do the subjunctive mood forms. What's happening with the verb to be, because all other verbs have already changed to look exactly like the simple past in, say, the second conditional, the regular subjunctive mood. If I ate every day, I would be healthy. To be is finally starting to make that shift. And what we're starting to hear is many native speakers, we kind of use either one. We'll say were or was. Was is still grammatically incorrect technically, but it doesn't really sound informal anymore. It sounds pretty normal. If you're in a formal situation, you should probably say were if it's subjunctive, but you can hear it on the TV, you can hear it everywhere, right? A lot of native speakers are stopping, well, it's not that they're stopping, but they're more and more they seem to be using this was form for I and he, she, it in the subjunctive. So instead of saying if I were you, they'll say if I was you. Instead of saying now you stays the same because the simple past of you is were, right? You were hungry. And I say if you were hungry, so that doesn't change because it's were and were are going to match. Um, but the subjunctive form I were is now changing to match the simple past, what looks like the simple past I was. And the subjunctive he, she, it were is starting to change to match the simple past, or what looks like the simple past, he, she, it was. All the rest are staying the same. So you were, we were, they were. There's no difference between the two. So I hope that makes sense. I know that's a little abstract. That's a lot of information. Might be a little confusing, but let me know if that makes sense or not. And so to directly answer your question, you say, can I use both? Yes. Yes, you can use both. Makes sense. Good. You can use both. As I said, if you're in a really formal situation, or if you're, say, if you're writing like, a technical document or an academic paper or something like that, then you definitely want to use the were version of the subjunctive mood for everything. I were, he were, you were, whatever. But in regular speech, if this situation isn't super formal, it's just like, it's pretty normal. Even at work, a lot of people, I think, are starting to make this switch. And I hear it a lot. I use it myself too. So some people will probably disagree with me and say, oh, no, that's wrong. You can't do that. But in my opinion, I think it's something that is changing, and say 50 years from now or 100 years from now, it's probably just going to be the way that the language is spoken. Maybe 200 years. We'll give it a little time, but it's a part of grammar that is changing. Steve, I was watching anime with subtitles in English and I saw Wheeze. What do you think the translator means with that? Just informal. Yeah, so there's a funny way that we can use English that is very informal, and it's not like a normal part of informal speech. It's just a way that we can manipulate the language to sound really informal and maybe like really uneducated. Sometimes it's not like, oh, look, I'm so uneducated. Like, it's like, why would you want to sound uneducated? But you can play with the language, and um, you could just speak certain ways because you want to, or because you want to give a certain effect to your speech. So a good example, you might have seen memes, where, like, say there's a cat, right? A cat meme, very typical of the internet, and maybe there's a cookie, right? And the cat looks sad, and the cat says, like, I can has cookie, right? Or hamburger. I can has hamburger, right? So I can has cookie. Okay. Has is not right, right? Because it's I have, I can have. And it's supposed to be can I have for the question, right? Um, so we're breaking the normal question form, and instead of saying I have, we're saying I has. And this makes it sound very uneducated, but it can also make it sound kind of cute in a way, especially if it's a cat saying it, right? Makes it seem almost like a baby, like, or a small child, like, oh, they're so innocent, like, I can has cookie, please, right? Um, and so we can manipulate the language like that. I just asked my roommate the other day, actually. She had I don't remember what it was. It was like, well, it was a Japanese thing. They were like sweet potato fry candy or something. Um, and she didn't want it. So I grabbed it and I was like, I can has, right? Just to give a certain effect, like, hey, you're a nice person. I want this. Can I have it, please? But instead I said, like, I can has, right? So it is very informal. It's a special use of the language. But then we have other things like Wheeze. Like if I say Wheeze going, I don't know. If I say We's gonna do that. We's gonna do that. Like it sounds sort of like a really sort of like almost like uneducated Southerner type sound in a way. Um, Wheeze is completely grammatically incorrect. There probably are some people who actually speak this way, and that's okay. Um, but it's definitely not a normal way to speak. And it's just like saying "I can have cookie." It's an intentional manipulation of the language so that you'll sound a certain way and you have a certain effect with it. So uh, yeah, that's probably what it is. I don't know the exact thing, but I've seen that in anime too, where if the person is using like really informal speech in Japanese, they like Goku. I see Goku translated a lot like this because of the way he speaks. He speaks sort of like in like an informal country type way, I guess, like a hick way, we would say. And so the English translation is where they'll do like the apostrophe on the in for ing, which is an informal way to write going. We say going, um, or little things like that to give him that sort of English feel based on how he's speaking in Japanese. Because we know Goku wasn't educated, right? He's been fighting all his life, and the way he speaks is not particularly eloquent, we would say, and that's fine. But yeah, that's all it is. Not a big thing, but good question. Yeah, Einstein's the context you give is fire. I really appreciate it. Oh, no problem. You're welcome. um, yeah, I still can't get over that because I I learned fire, this use of the word fire from TikTok. So that probably tells you I'm not young. I mean, I'm 31. So I mean, I'm young, but I'm not young. I still can't get used to that use of fire. Like I understand it, but I can't see myself using it. Like, oh, that's fire. It feels weird. But anyway, that's okay. Doppelganger, welcome to the chat. Yeah, I saw a fight on Discord, and the guy just said, "It's better you say who you is." There was even subtitle. I have no idea why he said is. That Well, if it was a fight, see, times like that, we're not going to use this sort of like informal type language because it's usually used to be sort of like cutesy in a way, like again, cat memes, right? Icon has cookie, or whatever the sort of effect is. But that person, like, they probably they seriously wrote "you is," and this sounds against it sounds sort of like from that sort of like rap hip hop, maybe sort of like ebonics or something kind of around there, which again is fine, as I've said many times before. But it definitely does not sound um, the best from like a general American type perspective. It sounds grammatically incorrect, and some people speak that way. That's just how they speak, and that's okay. But it doesn't sound good. You know. Um, so that would be sort of a regional dialectical thing that is not standard. Okay. Anyway, anything else? Any other questions? What does "at" mean? For instance, where's the party at? Good question. Well, what does "at" mean? That's a much generalized question that we could talk about for a long time. But I know at adds nothing. I was trying to read that differently. I know "at" adds nothing, but why? Okay. So I don't know if you were here, Einstein's. There have been several live streams. The first one was like I think maybe a month ago or so, where somebody was asking about you know he said that he kind of ignores prepositions because they just seem like filler to him. He doesn't understand why they're there most of the time. And so I was explaining that most of the time, prepositions are not fillers, right? They're very important. They're supposed to be there. But there are some special uses, some special cases where we can use a preposition even though it's not required. And so it's kind of filler, like it has to still fit there. It has to be like a legitimate use of the preposition, but it's not necessarily required. We can kind of drop it or not drop it. Um, like the preposition up does that a lot. That's probably the biggest example. Like if I say wash the dishes or wash up the dishes, the up is completely optional. It gives it a little bit of extra feeling, and it's tied to the logic of the preposition up, but it's completely optional in that case. Here with at, so if I say where's the party, okay, that's just a question. Perfect, right? We're trying to find the location that the party is at, right? So at is there. It's implied in the question. Where's the party? And then when we say where's the party at, we can choose to add it there, right? It's perfectly fine because it's already there in the context. We're asking about the location that the party is at. So where's the party at? It's all it is. It's just a thing that we can drop or add. It doesn't really matter. And yeah, it doesn't really give any extra feeling here. It's just you can choose to add it if you want. Yeah, it's a special case. Doppelganger, did you answer about the yeah thing? I don't remember if I asked it before. Maybe, I don't remember if you asked about it before. So since this is IPA, or I mean, you put in slashes, I'm not sure because the Y sound in what IPA is usually written as with the letter J, so I'm not sure what we're talking about here. Maybe it was yeah, because I know somebody asked about yeah. So if you can clarify that, I don't really know what you're asking with YA in between the slashes. But any other questions? Let's see if I have any other comments. One thing we can talk about here. So, username I don't know. I made a short answer to this originally. They were asking more information because there was interject and I made a little short on that. I don't know if you guys saw that, whoever's here. But I was saying that, right, normally when in American English, when a T connects over to a vowel, it becomes a flap D, but the K is kind of in the way. And so instead of being a flap D, it's just going to become sort of a weak D, which is another reason why I say the flap D is like a second weak D. It's a type of weak D. We have two weak T's and weak Ds. And so because it would be a flapped D and there is no flap T in American English, it might be spelled with a T, but it's a D sound. It's exactly the same as the flap D sound. So I don't use that term flap T. Um, it would become a D, but because the K is in the way we can't flap it, then instead of going back to a T, it stays a D sound, but it just becomes a weak one instead of flapping. So interjecta, 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 just a little D sound. And the question here, as a follow-up, they asked what other words use the flap D or weak D after the consonant that will connect to a vowel. And this was a pretty good question. I gave some examples, but I also followed it up with some other information. So the examples I gave, right? Remember, it doesn't matter if it ends with a T or ends with a D. It's going to be the same type of effect. So past state, popped out, laughed at, well, laughed at, or pushed out. And those are just some examples, but there are some consonants that could be before that T or D that might allow you to flap, but it's optional. You can always just do a weak D, so that's the easy thing to do. So if you see like as long as, right, because remember that like the ed ending, the e is silent, so that's why we have the consonant plus t or consonant plus d at the end there, or in the ed it would be plus d. Or in the case of 8, right, we have the gh, but there's no sound there. It's just a plus t, 8. Or sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Past state, right? So it'd be there's the s before it. So yeah, just focus on the weak D there. Even if it is possible to flap sometimes. And that makes it easier for you guys because the flap D is usually really hard anyway. So those are special cases. If you see any sort of consonant before the T or D and then it connects over to a vowel, if it's actually a pronounced consonant sound, not just like a silent letter, then do the weak D instead. But I also added this, right? Because remember, American English is very dynamic. And I was saying how you always have to remember that there are special combinations that could like override that or take control of that. So for example, the NP plus vowel rule, right? Here we have a consonant plus a T, and then if you have a vowel, you're not going to do a weak D here because what happens with the NT and the vowel is that's a special rule where the T will disappear and the N connects instead. So there are special cases where you might not do that, make that T into a weak D and connect to the vowel. If there's a consonant before it, you might just drop the T, right? Or whatever else might happen. So again, that's why I tell you guys like focus on your ears and actually get used to like real speech instead of trying to memorize a bunch of rules, because there's so many rules, and even if you memorize them all, it's not going to actually help you too much in your perception or your speech. You'll just have a bunch of knowledge. So it's much better to sort of subconsciously get a lot, like some rules are good, some rules are useful, right? They can help a lot. But for most of the rules, especially a lot of the little rules, and a lot of things that can like change depending on the sounds around certain things, like NT plus vowel versus interjecta, it's better to just kind of like pay close attention, notice, kind of like start to absorb it a bit, like based on what you're noticing, like, oh, okay, yeah, this works, that works. Ask questions, of course, but um, don't try to like memorize a bunch of rules because they're not going to help you very much. You can sort of make it more subconscious through lots of attention and practice. Okay, doppelganger. It's because I saw a guy using yeah a lot. I know. I knew it happened, but not so many times. Did I miss anything? No. Okay. And he wasn't speaking fast at all. He used tell you. Oh yeah. Okay. Tell you, fix you, to you, for you, see ya. The only moment he used you. Okay, so that's first. Before I finish reading this, so when you do this, right? This is the way to write IPA. Okay, which I don't. If you don't know what IPA is, you don't have to care. I don't recommend that you particularly pay too much attention to the IPA, but this is the way you're supposed to write it because the brackets tell us, okay, you're going to write it in IPA. So, for example, yeah, which is what you're asking about here. Okay, it would look like this. Okay, that's how you would write an IPA. So because you're using these slashes around the word, that's making me think that you're writing an IPA or trying to write an IPA, and it's really confusing me. It's really, really confusing me. So what you want to do instead, if you're actually not using IPA, you're just using English letters, do like this. You know, like even if you did parentheses, which wouldn't be good in English, but you know, some of you guys maybe you don't have the quotation marks on your keyboard or whatever. That would be a bit more understandable than using the slashes. So that's just so I can better understand what you're you're asking, because that was really confusing for me. When you gave the examples, I figured out what you were talking about. And then again, if you would write U in IPA, it would be like this. U. Because the letter J is the IPA symbol for Y, which is really confusing and doesn't make any sense, but whatever. So ignore all that about the IPA. Let's move on. The only moment he used U was when he said it as a main object or when he was emphasizing the word U. I'd like to know if the Y is part of some dialect, no E on part, of some dialect region of the US, or is it just normal casual way of speech? Okay, this is a very, very good question, and this goes directly to what I keep talking about with the dynamic range and flow of real speech. So yeah, which I would write like this because we think of the schwa sound as you with a silent H. So this is how I would phonetically write it in English, and that's how I write it in the English X phonetic transcription method. Yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah is a reduction for you. So you becomes yeah, just like do can become duh if it's not a main verb. And yeah, it can sound informal. It sort of depends on exactly how it's used, but fix you, tell you, I'm gonna tell you something. What can I tell you? What can I tell you? Yeah, it's a little bit tricky of when it sounds formal and when it doesn't. That's kind of a different topic, but it is a reduction. Reductions they're not necessarily informal. They're just a normal part of speech. And remember, in the range and flow of real speech in American English, over here for whether it's a sound or a word, you have the nice, clear, enunciated full version of the word, right? So that would be you in this case. And there's no reduction there. If you use this nice, clear version, you can't say yeah. Okay, it's you. And it doesn't really matter for the word you which way it comes out. But the clearer you're speaking, the slower you're speaking, the more likely it's going to come out nice and clear. Okay. Um, again, the word "you" is a little special here because you can still be speaking really, really quickly, but it just makes it sound a little bit clearer because the "oo" will stand out a little bit. But as you move from the full enunciated word, nice and clear, over to potentially a dropped word or a dropped sound, which there are certain special cases when you can do that. You can't just do that all the time, but that would be the other end, right? Nice, clear sounder word, dropped sounder word. And in between, right, there are certain factors like if you're speaking faster, if you're speaking more lazily, right, and or more lazily. So a combination of speed and how clearly you're enunciating will move it away from this nice, clear, fully pronounced word or sound. So yeah, right, a reduction is a move away from that nice, clear sound because we're actually changing the sound to a shorter, faster sound usually. Or a reduction could be a complete drop of a sound, like with him. If I say him can become, for example, like I don't like him, I don't like him, I don't like him. So in that case, the H is disappearing completely. As for your question here, so it doesn't matter if you is being used as the main object. It does matter if he's emphasizing, right? Because if you're emphasizing, you're more likely to sort of maybe slow down a little bit on that word. You're more likely to fully pronounce that word. So you're moving back over here, even if it's just for that word, and even if it's not all the way. What emphasizing does is it gives a little bit more time and a little bit more clarity to that particular word or syllable, depending on whatever it is we're doing. And so it's going to push it back over here. And again, that's why it's part of the dynamic range and flow because it depends on what you're saying. Are you emphasizing? Are you not emphasizing? Are you speaking quickly? Are you speaking more slowly? So in the flow of normal speech, yeah is not a dialectical thing. It's a normal part of everyday speech and casual speech. Again, sometimes it'll sound more informal, sometimes it won't. That's another tricky topic, but like if I say, do you like it? Do you like it? Okay. Um, you can be duh, because it's a helping verb here. You can be yeah. Like is like, it is it. Okay. Um, so we actually have a couple different ways we can do this. I could say, do you like it? Do you like it? And that sounds nice and clear. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing that says you have to say it that way or whatever. It's just if you're speaking a little more clearly and you want to make the question nice and clear, do you like it? Okay. Now it might kind of sound like you're emphasizing a bit, like maybe I asked you once and you didn't hear me, so I say, "Oh, do you like it?" And I give a little bit of shift in intonation there. Um, that's a different thing, but again, it comes out really clear. Do you? Do you? Now I could say, "Do you like it? Do you? Do you? Do you?" Reduce "duh" and not "you." That's probably not very likely because we're probably going to reduce both of them if we reduce one. But I could also say, "Do you like it? Do you? Do you? Do you? Do you like it? Do you like it?" So I'm reducing "yeah" and not "do." Or I can say, do you like it? Do you like it? And I'm reducing both of them. And again, that's because do and you are they're so common. They're sort of a special case where it doesn't really matter if you reduce them or not. But just like everything else, if you're speaking really, really clearly, you're really emphasizing, do you like it? Okay, now I'm sort of saying every word. Do you like it? You're not answering me. Tell me, do you like it? Then we're likely to not use the contraction. But in the flow of normal speech for these two words, it kind of doesn't matter. They're a bit of a special case. It's the same thing with to. To usually reduces to ta, but there's nothing stopping you from saying to in the flow of normal speech. It's just very likely to reduce. It's extremely likely that it's going to reduce. That's what usually happens. The flow of normal speech is over here, and the slow, clear enunciated word is over here, which is why we use enunciation as a tool, not as the normal way to speak. Right? Which is one reason why I tell you guys to not always enunciate, even though other teachers tell you that you should always enunciate, because number one, you're not going to sound natural. Number two, um, potentially it can actually make you harder to understand because we don't normally speak every little word enunciated like that. But to will almost always become ta. Um, we've seen this one before too. This is another good example. So go to, okay, there's actually, I think, like 6 or 7 different ways we can pronounce this, which seems crazy and a lot. You don't have to use all of them. Don't worry too much about it. But this is a good example of actual real speech. And this is not informal. This is not anything special. This is just normal speech. Okay. So we can say go to. So go doesn't reduce. It's a verb. To can become ta, but there's nothing stopping you from saying to. The full pronunciation of a word is always possible, even in the flow of real speech. It might happen to come out that way. It's just not likely if you're not slowing down and or emphasizing or whatever it is to move it back over here. But there's no rule that says you have to reduce to ta. It's just what normally happens like 99% of the time. So if we say go to, that's perfectly fine. We can also say go to, so it's 2 ways, reduce to ta, okay? Now in the case of go and to is a very, very special preposition. The sound T usually does not do this. This is a special case for the preposition to because it's such a common word. If the sound before the preposition to is voiced, which all vowels are voiced, it's very, very likely that it's going to change that T into a D, which is the voiced version of T. And in particular, it's going to turn to a flat D. So instead of saying go to, we can say go to, go to. I want to go to the beach. Go to, go to. So that's a third way to say it. Now you could also choose not to reduce to but keep the flap, and you can say go to. I want to go to there. Go to there. I want to go to the beach. Go to the. 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 It's very unlikely that you're going to say flap D plus ooh. I just noticed this is in the way again. Um, very, very unlikely because again, we're most likely to reduce to ta, but it is possible. It could come out that way as the unreduced form, even with that flap D. So that gives us 4 ways to say it, right? Go to, go do with a flap, and then go to with a flap. The most likely thing that's going to happen in this particular case is the flap D plus reduction. Okay, so probably 90% of the time you're going to hear go to, right? And that's the one that you should probably try to be able to do if you want to sound natural. But the other ones are possible. Sometimes they will happen to come out, and that's okay. In addition to that, we can say go to, and then let's see here, another. So like go to another store, right? Now, again, remember dynamic range and flow. The dynamic part is partially based on the speed, but it's also built based on what are the sounds around. Okay. And again, I know this can seem really complicated and whatever, but this is why if you try to memorize rules, your brain is just going to explode and you're going to be like, English is impossible. It's not. Okay. You just want to pay attention, get used to things over time. But what can happen here, two uses the oo vowel sound, right? It's not an O. It's spelled with an O, but it's an oo sound. If we don't reduce it, right? Now, the thing about the oo vowel sound, also the O vowel sound, is that if there's a vowel sound after it, and at the start of the next word, like another, then we can link those with what I call a small w, because we don't go all the way into a full W, but the end of oo and the end of O is very close to that W position. Ooh, ooh. It's not ooh, right? That's a W, ooh, ooh. And so when you release that position to go into a vowel sound, it's going to sort of sound like there's a little light or small W between the oo and that vowel. So to another, to another. Okay. So in this particular case, we have more variations. We can say go to, or sorry, go to another, go to another. You could say that. It's possible. Not likely, but possible. You can say go to another. So now you can just not connect them and just let the vowels flow into each other. And It's the same sound. They're both schwas, right? But you just say to another, right? And you kind of have to like re-push it out a little bit. That's a little bit of a tricky thing, but that's another possibility. Okay, to another, go to another. You can do the flap on the T to make it a flap D, and you can say go to another, go to go to another. Or you can again do the flap and reduce, go to another, go to another. Okay. So now in this particular case, because that oo can link over to the there's no rule that says you have to do that. You can always just say on t and then go to a vowel. There's no problem with that. We'll do that, plenty of times. But now because it can link with that small w, this particular case with the vowel after it makes it a little more likely that we might not reduce it. Again, there's no rule that says you have to reduce or not reduce here. It's just more likely that we might not reduce it because now we can connect it very nicely, right? And none of these answers are right or wrong. None of them are formal or informal. It's just variations of real speech. They're not dialectical. They're not regional in any way. This is just real, actual American speech. So I hope that answers your question, Doppelganger. I know I went off a little bit on a tangent a bit, but hopefully that's clear. If it's not, that's fine. You can ask me to explain something else more or whatever. But any other questions? Which I will note today. So I'm going to have to make the live streams a little bit shorter than usual because I'm actually getting busier, especially trying to work on the ear trainer, which is coming along very well. So today, and I'm definitely not going to go for 4 hours today. I usually do about like say 3 to 6 hours. I think those days are done. I'm probably going to have to limit it to 2.5, like maybe 3 hours on the long end, but probably like 2.5 hours. So today we were supposed to start at 1. I had some technical difficulties, so like 3:30 or so, I'm gonna have to go. So we have about another hour and 15 minutes left, but just keep that in mind. Okay, Einstein's. I don't know which one I should use. There's no chairs in this house. There aren't any chairs. Yeah. First, there are no chairs. Okay, another one. I think the first one is pretty common. Any examples? This is another example. See, Einstein's always has the best questions. Really, like it's amazing. You ask like just all the best questions. Not that other people don't ask good questions, but the questions that Einstein's usually asks are just like, man, these are such good questions. This is another example of how grammar is changing. So you got 2 in 1, 2 in 1 live stream. Good job. See, and I think this is also because like you're paying attention, you're noticing things, and you're like, hey, I notice sometimes people say this, sometimes people say this. What's the difference? Is one right? Is one wrong? What's going on here, right? So you're doing perfectly. You're noticing, you're paying attention. That is the first key, whether it's language learning in general, grammar, vocabulary, or its pronunciation specifically, definitely pronunciation. You need to pay attention. You need to pay very close attention and notice things. Okay. Don't obsess and try to memorize everything, but just notice, get lots of input, and notice things. Okay. And you're going to start to see things that come up over and over and over again. And then you can ask questions about them and be like, hey, what's going on here? And then someone like me can answer. So first, let's talk about there aren't any chairs and there are no chairs. So there aren't any chairs and there are no chairs. These are both perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with them. Right? Chairs is plural, so we're supposed to say are. Right? We'll come back to the there is in a second. And you can say there aren't. Right? There are not. That would be the uncontracted form. Are not. We almost always contract, so that's still good. There are not any chairs. There aren't any chairs. Fine. And that is definitely 100% grammatically correct. No problem. That's how it should be. Hello, David. Oh my God, you're finally here. I was wondering. I was like, what happened? Where have you gone? Yeah, I hope everything's good, and that you didn't like catch the virus or anything, because that would suck. But yeah, here we are. I'm in the middle of answering a question, so yeah, I'll continue that. When we say there are no chairs, so using this like instead of like is not or are not, using like no instead, that's an alternative structure. And I think sometimes if you try to use that, it's going to sound more informal, but in many cases, it's just another way to say the same thing. There are no chairs. I have no time, right? I have no money, right? And so it's usually don't really worry too much about it. But yeah, aren't any chairs or are no chairs, perfectly fine, good. Now with there's no chairs. Okay. Or since there aren't any chairs, can we also say there isn't any chairs? Because that would be right. The alternative for there aren't any, where there's no would be there are no, right? So let's look at these two. Now there's no chairs. This is part of what's changing. You'll actually, if you pay attention to my speech, including in my videos, you'll notice that I do this. It is technically grammatically incorrect. Incorrect, right? Grammatically incorrect. But it is something that is becoming extremely common. And I think it's another thing that is changing. And it doesn't sound bad. It doesn't sound bad, right? There's no chairs. Or there's many people. There's many people here. It sounds perfectly fine because it's becoming such a common way to speak, even though it is technically incorrect. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Again, maybe if you're in a really formal situation, or if you're doing like really formal writing, like academic writing, you want to avoid that. Um, but in normal speech, even if it's not necessarily informal, I don't think there's anything really wrong with that. For that last option, there isn't any chairs. There isn't any chairs. That one does sound a little bit weird, um, because what we usually do is we're going to say their apostrophe s as like one piece. That's sort of what's changing. It's whether it's singular or plural, right? There's singular, obviously, right? There's a person. There is a person. Fine, that's correct. There's many people. So instead of changing between is and are, what the thing that is happening is that there's apostrophe s is sort of becoming one unit, and it doesn't matter if it's singular or plural after it. That's the grammatical change that seems to be happening in American English. Um, and if you sort of disconnect the is from there and you say there isn't any chairs, that to me still sounds kind of okay, but it doesn't, it seems a little bit off, a little bit weird. So um, I would maybe avoid that. But if you're using the contracted version, and then if you want to emphasize like there is no chairs, it depends. It might sound weird. It might sound not so weird. It's not correct. So if you don't uncontract it, you just use it as one unit, it's generally going to sound fine. But outside of that, it's a little tricky, potentially dangerous if you're in a formal situation. So um, I would maybe stay away from uncontracting it because that's a whole different thing. But yeah, so David, I'm glad to see you. I'm healthy and well. Thank you for asking. Good, very nice. And could you talk a little bit about the word yeah? I was just thinking about this the other day too. And describe the vowel sound. Does it change when it's stressed and when it's uttered quickly in a conversation and perhaps emphasized less? Okay, so this ties into the dynamic range and flow. But let's see. So yeah. There's actually, okay, so for the basics here, what I've noticed, because some things I don't notice until you guys ask me. And then like a couple weeks later, it'll kind of pop back into my head and I'll be like, yeah, okay, that works. Where before I would have said like, I don't really know, or that sounds kind of weird. And then I actually notice, oh yeah, this is sort of how people speak. Um, because there are things like we don't necessarily think of certain things in certain ways, but then it turns out that people actually use it that way and we just don't kind of notice it. So I've had several cases like that, and this is one of those cases. So I would never think to describe this as having a bit of a schwa sound because some people have asked me that. I think David, actually, maybe you asked me that specifically before. And I was kind of like, no, it doesn't. It's not supposed to have a schwa sound. It's yeah, yeah, yeah. So you're going yit to ah, yeah, yeah. That's what it's supposed to be. But I have noticed that it's actually really common to say yeah, yeah, and sort of have this little like schwa after the ah. We kind of, the tongue is up here, yeah, and then we just let the rest of the tongue drop after going into ah. And that's another way to say it. I don't think that's informal. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It can come out that way. So there you go. That's fine. Does it change when it's stressed and when it's uttered quickly in a conversation and perhaps emphasized less? So again, this goes back to that dynamic range and flow. The more that you stress something, or the sort of slower you're speaking, or the more clearly you're speaking, you're going to be over here on this like clearly emphasized word or sound. And then usually the faster or lazily less clear that you're speaking, the more things might kind of start to change and get a little bit weird. We tend to get reductions on unstressed words and stuff. So um, if it's stress, right? If I say, when do I stress? Yeah. Okay, if I'm like really excited, somebody like mentions an idea, and I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I'm just kind of going ah, right? Would I say yeah, yeah? It seems kind of weird for me to like drag it out all the way to the point where I have that schwa sound. Like I'm gonna kind of, when I'm emphasizing it, I'm actually, I think you would be less likely to have that little schwa after, and it would just be ah. It's kind of like a point, an exclamation point, right? Yeah, yeah. Um, if it's maybe just in the flow, I say like, let's see, like, yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there, because I'm going to I is kind of going back. It's a little bit farther back than ah. So it's kind of like as I drop the tongue down to go to ah, kind of like hit that schwa first and then go into I. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it might matter what's after it. If I say, for example, yeah, that's. So we're actually going to go away from that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that. Yeah, that. Yeah. And I'm kind of letting that schwa get in there and then going into the th. Yeah, that's. Yeah, that's. That's probably maybe a little bit of a lazier way to say yeah instead of going all the way into ah. We're kind of like we're moving mostly into ah, and then we kind of just let the rest of the tongue come down, and that's probably how we say it really quickly, which is kind of weird when you think about it. But saying it as ah or ah I don't think really matters in any case necessarily, but if you're really saying it like stress and like an exclamation, I would definitely not add the schwa to it. It should be a little more pure in that case. Um, Still have trouble hearing the real difference between the third vowel and schwa and the fourth vowel and schwa. It's like the Y sound that comes before makes them sound extremely similar. I'd have thought yeah would be plus schwa. That's my point. Really good explanation. Well, good. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, yeah. So if I do this, this is also a good point here. There's a reason why you're sort of getting confused here, or why you would think that it would be three plus schwa. If I do three, like whether with or without the schwa, if I go from yit to three, yeah, 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 that's like yes, right? Yeah. Um, and if I want to say yeah, I'm not going to say yeah, yeah. It's not right. If I add a schwa to that, yeah, 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 that kind of sounds like you're saying yeah in like a really, really like you're intentionally manipulating the sound. Like yeah, yeah, that's awesome, right? It's kind of like a special way to say it. So that is possible if you have that schwa after it, but that's not like the normal way that it would come out. Um, the thing about ah, which is the fourth vowel, as you said, as I call it, the fourth vowel. Which I know I mentioned this before, but I don't know if you were here. Um, there's a pure way to make the ah, and there's a lazy way to make the ah. Um, the pure way, of course, is a nice good sound. Ah, ah, ah. So we open a lot, we get the tongue, down. There's a particular shape to it. Okay, ah, and it sounds very nice and clear. But then there's the lazy way. And what the lazy way does is it gets really, 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 really close to eh. Really close to eh. We don't open nearly as much for the lazy version, but we still have that similar type of shape. And so I'm going to do three and then lazy ah, and you might not really hear a difference, which could be the source of your problem here. But I'm going to say them side by side. Three and then lazy ah. And let's see. Eh, ah, eh, ah, eh, ah. So I'm barely opening my jaw. I'm not saying ah, eh, ah, eh, ah. It's more a little change in my tongue, how the shape of my tongue. And it sounds, at least to us natives, obviously it doesn't sound like a nice clear ah sound, but it sounds very clearly to us like the fourth vowel and not the third vowel. It's like night and day. Even though physically they're so close together, they sound completely like completely different sounds. And that can be difficult for non-natives trying to learn English because if you don't hear ah and you hear the lazy ah ah ah, then it's going to sound a lot like eh, right? Um, David just reminded me of the use of the less versus fewer or few. Yeah, that's another one. That's another one that's changing. Very good, Einstein. I prefer using less, but I heard people saying fewer, fewer for countable and uncountable nouns. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Yep, the lazy at is super similar to though I can clearly hear it's brighter and less Neutral. Yes. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's a bit brighter. It's less neutral than eh. Eh is kind of flat. There's eh. It's like an like a schwa, but like in the front of your tongue. It's just very bleh. Um, where ah, even if it's lazy, it kind of has a little bit of a different quality to it. I was gonna say something else about that. Yeah. So whatever. That's what that is. Oh, David, I wanted to ask you also really quick if because I know you've been gone from the live streams, but I don't know if you've been watching my videos I've been releasing. I made a video on placement, and I don't think you ever asked about placement before, but I know since you're all into linguistics and sounds and all this stuff, it's probably a concept that you're aware of. And if you've seen my placement video, I would like to know your opinion on that. If you haven't, we could talk about it later. But anyway, Einstein's. So less versus fewer or few. So less versus fewer, few. Well, few actually I think is part of a different thing. But less versus fewer. Yeah. So grammatically, according to official English grammar, right, less is for uncountable things, uncountable, and fewer is for countable things. That's how it's supposed to be. um, but what you will hear a lot of natives doing, and I've heard this in many different contexts, even from people who maybe it's not a super formal situation, but like, they're in a suit and tie, and maybe it's like a video where, they're dressed for the part. They're not like, in casual clothes, and they'll still say this, they'll still make this mistake. So I think it's something that's changing. And what people will do is they'll say less with uncountable and less with countable. I myself am guilty of this. I do it all the time. And it's something that, even though I'm an English teacher, which I know what the difference is, right? But it's just how I speak. Sometimes I'll say fewer. Usually I just say less, even though it's wrong. And my roommate likes to correct me because I'm the English teacher. He's not, and he's like, "You mean fewer?" I'm like, yeah, fewer." Um, so I really think it's something that's changing in actual like real speech. Again, another like 100 years or so, everybody will probably just be saying less, and that will be grammatically correct. So my recommendation for this, again, if you're in a really formal situation or you have like some formal writing to do, this one, even in like just a work email, usually these things don't affect work emails. It's just whatever. It's like usually really formal writing. But for this, even if it's just like a work email, I would say fewer instead, because it's something that, right, there's like a scale of change. It's like sort of like starting to change, in change, almost completed, and then it sort of becomes grammar. This one I would put in like kind of like in the middle of change. So there's a lot of people who look at this and they say, "Oh, that sounds uneducated. That sounds really informal. That sounds wrong." And then there's a lot of other people who naturally use it and they don't notice and they think it sounds fine, whether they're educated or not. I know some educated people who use that, and so it's kind of in the middle there, and it's going to take a little bit more time for it to shift over into like almost completely grammar. So you want to be a little bit careful with it depending on the situation, but in regular everyday speech, even if it's not informal, this should be perfectly fine if you use less instead of fewer, and you can just ignore fewer. Um, Depends on how safe you want to be. So you can do the proper way, or you can use my recommendation, um, and you should be fine. But um, with few is a bit different. We can talk about few because few is a very tricky grammar point. And for those of you who don't know, there's a big difference between few and a few. They're actually opposites, which is very surprising to many English learners. But that has nothing, well, I mean, it does have something to do, but it's not really about the idea of fewer, meaning a lower amount of something. Um, Few is about a small amount of something, not a lower amount of something. So they're related, but fewer and few are not like in the same thing. They're not used for the same thing. They're used to say something slightly different. So yeah, if you want me to talk about the Einsteins, like the difference between a few and few, we can do that. Just let me know. But David, oh my God, that's so sweet that you give a damn, yeah, about my thoughts. I will definitely catch up with your new videos and share my impressions. I actually wanted to comment on your crazy work ethic and how much I love all the new content. Well, I don't really know about crazy work ethic. I mean, half the time I kind of feel like I'm drowning. um, Not because of so much work, but because of like trying to keep up with the. I'll say this because there's things that I'm doing outside of YouTube, um, and that is what's making me extremely busy. Plus, I have my second channel as well that I started. So, in general, yes, I am super super busy. But for this particular channel, which is my generally my main focus, I feel like, especially if I wasn't doing all the other things, if I weren't lazy, because I am kind of lazy, I could put a lot more in. And sometimes I feel like, oh, I only posted 2 videos this week. Like, I really should work harder and posted a third video. But I also feel like I don't want to overwork myself because I did that before and it didn't end very well. So it's always in my mind, it's like a balancing act where it's like, push yourself, but don't go too hard for too long because you're gonna probably like tip over. And I'm always kind of like trying to walk that line of like what's too much. And if I start feeling like it's too much, I'll kind of like dial it back a bit. And then I feel like I'm just being kind of too lazy. And so it's like it's just a constant like mental battle for me, like just every day, every week. But I try not to make too big of a deal out of it. But yes, I appreciate that you're liking all the new content and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, I do like your opinion. I mean, I like other people's opinion too. Your particular opinion, I think, is very useful because of the things that you've already studied and looked at. You're the one who made me aware that people with the cot merger sometimes use the unmerged version and don't notice it. Now I kind of notice it a bit more, but only when I'm editing my videos. If I'm editing my videos and I notice I said on instead of on, it's like, oh, okay, I do that, and I didn't even notice I said it that way. Um, so yeah, and with placement, it's a bit of a. Okay, I'll give you a little spoiler. My position on placement is that it can be useful and it can help with certain things, but it's not required to sound natural. It depends a bit on your native language and where you're coming from, but it's not the most important thing, I don't think. Where on the other side, I know Rachel's English. She says like it's the number one biggest hack and it's like the most important thing you can do and this and that. And I'm like, I don't understand why she says that like at all. It's really confusing to me. And I did experiments with it on non-natives and natives, and I came to the conclusion I did after a lot of research, and I made my video. So I don't know what your opinion on placement is, if you even have an opinion, but it would be nice to know what you think about my particular view on that is. But anyway, doppelganger, less equals without. Okay, good question. Um, Now, less as a word, no. um, There is a special use of less as a word, which can mean without. Like in French, it would be like sans, which we sometimes we say sans, which I think in French it's more like sans or something like that. I don't know. I don't speak French yet. Um, but like if I say, which we don't normally do this, it's sort of a special thing. It sounds kind of formal in a way, but if I say, "Oh, can you get me some tea, less sugar?" Right? It's like tea without sugar. Um, Again, we don't normally use less that way, but it is a way that you could use the word. But the word itself usually does not mean without, right? It means a lower amount of something, just like fewer, except it's supposed to be for uncountable things. Less water, for example. However, the suffix, suffix, something attached to the end of a word, less, which is often pronounced more like lis or lus with an I or a schwa sound, because it's usually not stressed. The main part of the word will be stressed. That does mean without. Yes. Now, depending on what word we attach it to, I think generally it should always be the case that it means without, but there might be some cases where it's not, just, because it's English. Like that seems like there should be something in my brain somewhere that it's not without, but I can't think of any specific examples. So I would say generally, yes, it means without if you use it as a suffix. So fearless is without fear. Hopeless is without hope. Um, Now, we don't always add less to any word. Like we wouldn't say despairless to meaning like you have no despair, right? Because despair means no hope, right? Like if you're despairing, you are hopeless. So if you say despairless, that would mean like you're very hopeful, and we don't say despairless. Like it's just not, we don't add less to that word. So you can't just add it to any word, unfortunately. um, or if like faceless, the faceless man, or something like he doesn't have a face. Or we might use that like if like say big data companies, right? They maybe mine your data or whatever, and you don't know who's doing that. It's some guy, and at some company that you'll never see. So he's like a faceless person, is that you don't know his face or her face. It's a faceless person that's collecting your data or whatever it is. So there's different ways that we can use that. But yes, you're correct. Doppelganger. Um, or endless. Endless is another one, meaning without end. It doesn't end, right? Like the endless reaches of space. I used to follow Rachel a lot. I even got her accent ebook years ago, but I don't agree with a lot of what she teaches. Interesting. Your channel was literally a godsend. It confirmed so many things I suspected, but couldn't get a confirmation on, either because there are certain things native speakers just don't hear, as you mentioned earlier, or they're too attached to the IPA and what dictionaries say instead of using their ears. There you go. I know, that's why I feel like half the videos I put out, I'm just like, wonder what other teachers would think about this. Not that that's necessarily influencing what I'm going to say, but it's just like I know some things I say sort of go against what other teachers might say. Um, so I can imagine a case where like somebody finds my video, they go to their, their teacher, whoever they have, and they're like, "Is this correct?" And then their teacher's like, "No, that's not correct." And it's like, but yeah, like, because I mean, again, I don't like follow Rachel. I've seen quite a few of her videos at this point because I've had students who ask me, "Oh, Rachel says this, Rachel says that," because she's a big channel. Um, and I mean, a lot of what she says, I think, is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I would, generally agree with it. But there's also a lot, like as you say, that like either I wouldn't describe it that way, or I would just disagree. Like with placement being super, super important. I see why she says it's super important, but mm, I don't completely agree with her conclusion. Um, so it's heartening for me to I mean, even though, yeah, you're an English learner, not a native speaker, but again, because you have this background where like you've learned a lot of this, like the technical stuff and this and that, whatever, and then you're also watching me, and I'm not so very technical. um, and then I'm the one who's kind of like filling in the gap, I guess. It's very heartening that you sort of have that view as well. So makes me feel like, well, it's not just me, because I could just be some crazy guy who is just talking about stuff, and maybe Rachel is correct because she's the one with the big channel. Like I'm a really small channel still, but anyway. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's completely about being right or wrong. Like I also made a video, David. I don't know if you saw that one, about how American English doesn't have one neutral accent. And if you haven't seen that, I think you'd be very, very interested in that. But what was I going to say about that? Completely lost my thought. Oh yeah. Um, what I found in my research for that lesson is that the standard like vowel chart and the standard pronunciation, like standard English General American, that pronunciation teachers teach and that accent coaches teach, even to like say American native speakers who are from other places, or like British English speakers who are trying to get an American accent for acting or whatever. It's actually a fake accent, or a semi-fake accent that little to no native speakers actually speak. And there's nothing wrong with it because it still sounds neutral, right? It's still perfectly fine, and you can learn to speak that way. But again, like with the cot merger, it makes everything so much easier. So like, why would you learn this, yeah, neutral sounding but kind of fake accent when you could learn, like, even if it's not from me, like you can learn, say, the Western American accent, which still sounds neutral. Um, but there's little changes that make it actually easier for non-natives to learn, right? So anyway, Einstein's, I know we can say don't study, but could we say do be honest? I think I heard do plus verb before. I might be wrong though. Maybe other combinations. Okay, so this is a good question too. Yeah. So this is with the imperative, which, funny enough, right? This is the imperative mood. We talked about the indicative mood and the subjunctive mood earlier. The imperative, the command form, is also a mood, right? And again, you don't have to worry about what a mood is. Um, that's why I like using command form instead of imperative mood, because it doesn't sound so grammary. It's easier to understand. About the pronunciation. Okay, I'll come back to you. Kagla. I have no idea how to say your name, or Sagla, I guess. I don't know. Sorry if I say that wrong. I'll come back to you in a second. That's a good question. Um, so with the imperative mood, the command form, right? You can make a negative command. You can make a positive command. Okay, and normally what we do, so if it's negative, obviously we say don't and then verb. That's just the way we make the negative command. Don't do it. Don't study. Don't go there. Okay. And that's fine. In the positive, right? Here's the trick. This is, at least to me, because I'm a kind of a language nerd, this really like blows my mind, and I'm just like, ah, it's so amazing. But I've talked in a previous live stream about how if we say I eat, I don't eat, and then like do I eat as a question. Okay, we see in the negative we use do plus not. So do is a helping verb to make the negative. We don't say I eat not like say German does. We say I don't eat, and then in the question we say do I eat, right? And so it seems like in the negative in the question form, do as a helping verb just appears out of nowhere. Like, why does English do this? This is stupid. But if you want to emphasize I eat, you can either say I eat, and you can emphasize eat, or you can say I do eat. Do is always there, right? If it's past tense, it would be did. If it's future tense, it would be, well, future is a little bit different because we have the will. But past tense or present tense, do or did, it's always there. Okay. It's just that usually for the positive statement, it's very unnecessary, because if you say do eat, it's like you're adding an extra word that, like, we could just use the verb itself. Um, and then when we make the negative, that do sort of seems to magically appear because it's already there. We're not saying it, right? And we add the negative do not, and then we contract do and not, and we get don't. For the question, we know that usually the subject, for throughout the whole English language, well, pretty much the whole English language, to make the question from the statement, you just switch the subject and the helping verb, not necessarily the main verb, because English is weird. But so instead of saying I do, we say do I, and then everything else is the same. And so that's why in the question, to make a yes or no question, we say do I eat, because the do is already there. We just don't normally say it in the positive statement. So if you are making a positive command, what we normally do is we drop do, and we'll say be honest, right? Just, we're just saying, hey, be honest, right? But I could maybe emphasize it a bit and say, do be honest, right? And actually, when we add do to the command here, it actually sounds a little bit dated like maybe from like 200 years ago. It sounds a little bit fancy in a way. And so we don't really use this in everyday speech anymore. But if we kind of want to sound fancy, like, oh, do be honest, right? You think it's horrible, whatever. I don't know. But sometimes people will still say it. It's just, I think, a little bit unnatural in modern speech most of the time. Or if we say like, I don't know, go home, right? Do go home, right? Again, it kind of sounds really fancy, like, oh, do go home. Like a sophisticated person, they have like, like a cigarette with a like one of those long holder things, and they're like dressed up to go to a fancy party. And they're like, oh, do go home, something. I don't know. So I would generally just ignore that. But that's why it's possible to be there because do technically is there like at all times. Um, but in a positive command or just a positive statement, like do I, did I, or not do I, did I, this question, I eat, I ate, um, we just drop do, right? Um, Now for Sagla, can you make a video about the pronunciation? So you mean like the pronunciation of the word the, I assume. Um, Filippo, welcome to the chat. Hope you're doing well. So for this question, I could just talk about this here. um, I mean, I could do a short video, I guess, which might be useful, but um, the problem here, the word the, so, okay, there's the full pronunciation of the word the is the. So it's a voiced th, which is a difficult sound for many English learners, and then the sound e, the vowel sound e, the. Now we almost never say it that way. If there's a vowel after it, like the other day, um, the old rule used to be that you're supposed to say the plus the vowel. So if there's a vowel, you have to say the. But in modern English, that's not a rule anymore. It's still something that commonly happens because it was part of the language, and it does make it very easy to just connect it through and whatever. So you can say the other, or you can say the other. So the second pronunciation of the, right, it reduces, and E will change to which is the schwa, which is another difficult sound for English learners. So you have two difficult sounds here, right? If you use the reduced form, which is the most common way to say it, even if there's a vowel after it. So you have to make sure that you can do the TH sound, right? And then you have to make sure you can do the schwa sound. So the first place where you want to start, right, it's building blocks. It's very scientific. Make sure you can do the by itself. Do put it in different words. This, that, these, those, whatever it is. You can also do the dental D variation. Dental D variation, which is where you lay the tongue more flat and you say the. Okay. So for the, it would be the. That's sort of an easier way to do it. And that's perfectly fine. It doesn't sound informal. There's no problem with it. For the schwa, you have to be able to get sort of in the middle. You can look up my vowel chart. There should be a link in the description somewhere to my downloads page on my website. It's I've talked about that. I have a lesson for the schwa sound. You can watch that. There's a couple different ways to make it. But once you can do th and you can do then you got to put them together. The. Or if you do the dental D version, the. So it can be very difficult, but if you break it down and you get the pieces first and then put them together, um, you'll get it. You'll get it. But when you're finding sounds, you want to make little changes because if you're trying to say the and you're saying like okay, it doesn't really sound like a th. Maybe you're too far away from the position. Okay, if you're saying it, right, you're kind of pushing too hard on the tongue, the air can't flow. So you need to make little changes based on how you're trying to do it. So, maybe move your tongue back a little bit, move your tongue forward a little bit, get closer to the teeth, farther away from the teeth, depending on whatever you have to do. And you play with it until you can find it and it starts sounding good. And you'll need feedback. You can record yourself, which can help. but getting feedback from a real person, which you can find on italki, is ideal, and they can tell you, oh, it sounds like this or it sounds like that, and then you can make little changes to see if it sounds better. Um, so I hope that helps. Sagla, I guess. Again, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but yeah. David, so all the do's reminded me of something when spoken really fast. Do both did you and do you end up sounding like Jew, or that isn't the case for do you? Good question. Like it. Hmm. Yeah, so for those who don't know, I have a renewed hope for all English teachers anytime you mention the dental D. Well, good. I'm probably one of the only, I mean, I don't know, maybe you've seen other English teachers talk about it, but as far as I know, I'm the only one talking about it. But yeah, so for those of you who don't know, the D and the Y can blend. There's nothing that says they have to do that. It's a very common thing that happens. So dit plus ya, because of the proximity, it'll become j. And so we'll get like did you, right? Did you, which sounds just like the word Jew, which is uh, probably part of the reason why David spelled it that way. Oh, so Matt enters the chat. Welcome, Matt. Yeah, so where we kind of, yeah, so do, like where we drop the vowel on do, and then can that blend then? So with did you, this is a very common thing. There's no problem with it. Or you can even say did ya, right? You can reduce you to ya, did ya, no problem. That might sound informal sometimes, but whatever. For do, so like Matt says here, we can actually, good to see you too, Matt. I just saw your last comment. Hope everything's good. Just like Matt says here, we can sort of drop that vowel on do and say like, do you, do you, do you. It's really like you're just going from a D to a Y. Do you, do you. And that's probably because we can reduce do to duh, and the schwa sound, especially in really common words that have reductions, the schwa sound can often become so small that it kind of just disappears. um, this is one reason why and can reduce all the way to just n. So we can say do you like it? Do you like it? Do you? Now, can we blend that D and that Y into a J? That's the question. So if I say, do you like it? Do you like it? Do you like it? I'm going to say, let me see, hold on. Do you like it? 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 Okay. I was gonna say no, and then I thought of something else, and I was like, okay, yeah, maybe. Yes and no. The simple answer is yes, but there's a little detail here. A good point, Matt. Fast speech. Fast speech. In fast speech. Okay, we're talking about fast speech, not slow. Again, dynamic range and flow. If you're speaking more clearly, you're less likely to reduce. You're less likely to drop sounds. So it has to be for fast speech. A lot of things will also apply to normal speech that's not super, super fast. This, what I'm about to tell you, only applies to really fast speech. Okay, not normal speed speech. Um, if you just blend the d and the y, and you say like, "Do you like it? Do you like it?" That's going to sound like you're dropping the di in did and just blending the d in did with you, and it's going to sound like past tense. However, if the context is clear that it's present tense, then it will be interpreted as present tense do. That's why I had to think about it for a second, because I was like, wait a second. So again, only in really fast speech. Context is important, but did you and do you can both be reduced all the way down to Jew or ja if you reduce you to ya. Again, only in fast speech, really fast speech. Possible, yes. Good question. So normally, no, that will not happen for do you. That's just a special, really fast case. Oh, interesting. So I can send a link where that happens. I document such reductions. Interesting, yeah. Well, the YouTube won't let you put a link, unfortunately. You'd have to send that to my email, um, which is I have it on my contact page or my about page, but contact at jdanielauthor.com. So it's easy to get right there. If you send it there, then I can definitely get it, and that would be great. I can also double check and verify for you, but there might be some things that I'm not aware of that I see in there that I'm like, oh yeah, so that could help me too. If you don't mind sharing, um, that would be great. But did you do okay? Einstein's. Why does the article a have two pronunciations? Actually, three. Interesting. The diphthong a sounds like someone wants me to pay attention to what they're saying. Three pronunciations. Okay, so we have a, we have and then what's the first one? Ah. I'm not sure what because as far as I know, just has two pronunciations. Unless maybe I haven't noticed something. Interesting. So the as in cat. Yeah, that's not a pronunciation for the article a. Um, car. Yeah, that car. No, no. If you say an, okay. Well, I know what and a are. Yeah, that's normal. But if you say an with the n after it, okay, and that's the only reason we add the n is if the next sound is a vowel. Okay, that's what we're supposed to do. Sometimes natives will break that rule and they'll just say a or and then a word that starts with the vowel. But usually it's still a pretty strong part of the language that you have that n in between. And if you use an instead of a, then that is supposed to be the fourth vowel sound. Okay, but only with the n after it. Otherwise, it's not pronounced as in cat. Um, so it has two pronunciations. The full pronunciation is a, and that's just the fully pronounced version of the word. That's over here on the scale. Okay, that's how the word is supposed to be pronounced, according to, if you're emphasizing, you're speaking really slowly and clearly, it's a. However, just like the word the, right, well, the is the nice, clear, full pronunciation of the word the, but we usually don't say it that way. The and a, being the two articles that we have in English, are so super, 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 super incredibly common, two of the single most common words in the entire language, that of course they're going to get reductions, and they're function words. So they're usually not stressed by default. They're not stressed. They're function words, I mean grammar words. So they don't hold any content really, and they're super super common. So when you have those three pieces together, it's pretty much guaranteed that there's going to be a reduction in it. So that's why. So the becomes the, a becomes right? So let's do the becomes the, a becomes and that's just how the articles work. And then for an, especially if you're speaking quickly, an can reduce to un, or it can potentially just reduce to n. I can say, instead of saying an apple, I can say an apple, an apple. Right? An apple a day keeps the doctor away. An apple away keeps the doctor away. There might be a little bit of a schwa in there, but you can just do a pure n and it's perfectly fine. So yeah, I'm not sure where you heard that. Like, I don't know if it's your ears or if somebody actually said, like if a teacher said that a can be reduced or a can be said as the a and cat, or if you're just confusing it with like the n version. Um, but yeah, that's definitely not right for the regular a. We don't say a. Would it be okay to use the unreduced vowel for as instead of reducing it and say it really fast? Work as a teacher. Work as a teacher. Yeah, so remember, one of the biggest, most important rules to understand, I put rules in quotations because technically it's a rule, but you really don't have to look at it as a rule. Part of how the English language functions, particularly American English, again, because we have this dynamic range and flow, the full pronunciation of a word is always possible. Usually, it only happens when you're speaking, really slow, you're speaking really enunciated. Like even if you're speaking kind of quickly, but you're still trying to enunciate a bit more, then that full pronunciation is more likely. So it's a dynamic range and flow depending on how you're speaking. Um, but even if you're speaking quickly, it's still always possible to do the full pronunciation. There's nothing that says you can't do it. There's nothing that says you have to reduce necessarily. It's just that the faster you're speaking, the less likely you're going to use the full pronunciation for things that change, right? If there's like a reduction, you're speaking quickly, you're almost guaranteed to use that reduction, but there's nothing that says you absolutely have to as like a 100% rule. Um, and so for as, yes, I mean, I could say, I work as a teacher. I work as a teacher. Now I'm taking a little bit of extra effort. It's slowing me down just a little bit to hit that but I'm still speaking pretty quickly. I work as a teacher. I work as a teacher. Normally I say I work as a teacher. Work as a teacher. Um, so again, because of the speed and because of getting into certain sounds, the reason why as reduces to like uz with like a schwa sound type is because we don't have to go down as much. It's a little more neutral. We can hit it more quickly and keep going. As is also a function word. It's a grammar word, not stressed, just like a and the. So um, if we try to take the time to hit in the unstressed word, right? If it's like cat, we have to hit the Maybe we could do the lazy which is the reason why the lazy exists is because of the speed. Um, but outside of that, like we can't do a different sound for cat because it's a content word. Um, but for as, because it's not stressed, it's a function word, not saying which is possible, is it's much more likely to not say it that way because it's going to slow us down a little bit at least to get into that full position. Thinks I was mispronouncing the article. Okay, good. Well, there we go. Not good that you were mispronouncing it, but good that I helped you fix that. David, I have to go, sadly. I'm going to have to go soon too anyway. But please know that you have my unconditional support and love, love, love what you're doing. I missed I. And that pronunciation tool software looks insane, as an incredible. Yeah, I actually have it starting to work a little bit. I can open 2 windows. Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you for that. I'll leave one last question here. Not sure if you remember, but we once discussed how the D in birthday is actually dental because of the influence of the TH. I don't remember that actually, no. The shift from alveolar D to a dental one makes it easier to say the word. Does the same thing happen for a T? So you have birthday, birthday, birthday. Yeah, so you can say birthday, right? Where you don't actually say the TH is like birthday, birthday. You sort of hold it for a second. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. With bathtub, or the bathtub. Yeah, no problem with that. In the bathtub. Perfectly fine. Now, if you had, say, like a voiceless TH and then a D, it might not quite work. It probably still would because we have ways to handle that, but I'd have to think of an example for that. But anyway, yeah, good question. So no problem with that. Anyway, yeah, so we're at almost 2 hours here. I'm gonna go to 2.5 hours. That's very loud. Very, very loud. I'm sure you guys can hear that because it's super loud. We're at 1 hour and 54 minutes right now, and I'm going to go to 2.5 hours. So we have 36 minutes left. So if anybody still has questions, now's the time to ask them before we run out of time. See if we can bring anything else up here. Yeah. All right. No questions, guys? Also, stupid computer. Oh, kind of tired. Opening up my email. Yeah, keep forgetting to open up my email client because my computer's been being stupid and has to restart, and then it doesn't start up. It doesn't start up at startup. Einstein's is thinking, what about not two and two? Oh God, I hate that question. I really hate that question. Give me some examples because I'm horrible at thinking of examples for this. If you have any examples in particular, we can talk about that. This is one that's kind of difficult to describe. Not two versus two. No. Let's see if we can find any help here. Just to jog my mind. Yeah, that makes sense. This grammar terminology. I hate it. This is such a horrible. So much grammar. Uh-huh. Okay. Uh, let's see. How not to train your ears. How to not train your ears. Maybe. Yeah, good example. um, there might be a case I'm not thinking of, but okay. There's something in English grammar called splitting the infinitive. Right? The infinitive is the dictionary form to do, to go, to train. And grammatically, you're not supposed to split the infinitive. Blah. Um, the explanation that I just read from somebody on Quora, I was just like, God, this sounds so grammatical and horrible. There's nothing wrong with splitting the infinitive. Okay. Now, the thing I just read, the person said that it can make it sound more dramatic. And although it's technically grammatically incorrect, you could use it, but it sounds special, like you say, how to not, right? And if you give emphasis to not, then that's fine. Um, but I can do that either way to make it sound more dramatic, how not to train your ears or how to not train your ears. In reality, in everyday speech, both of these sentences or both of these questions are 100% perfectly fine. Technically, one is grammatically incorrect, but it sounds perfectly fine. It doesn't sound wrong. Yeah, not to train your ears. How to not train your ears. Depending on details in the context and exactly what words we're using, it could be understood slightly differently. How to not train your ears. How to train your ears, or how not to train your ears. Not train your ears. I can't think of what I mean by that right now. It's more obscure. But generally, my recommendation, which a lot of English teachers would probably disagree with me, um, well, partially disagree with me. My recommendation first would just to put not before to. That's just the normal standard position. That's where it usually goes most of the time anyway. But if you were to split the infinitive, which it could also be with other words instead of not, like the example I just read was from Star Trek, right? The original Star Trek, they said to boldly go where no one has gone before. There's nothing wrong with that. It's grammatically incorrect, but it sounds perfectly fine. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So splitting the infinitive is perfectly fine. That's where a lot of teachers will probably disagree with me. I think it's perfectly fine. Maybe there's some cases where it would sound a little bit weird or something, but I can't think of a case like that. Like it doesn't really matter. But I will say again, the normal standard most common way is to not split the infinitive. Not like I just said to not. Actually, oh, I just split it right now. To not split instead of not to split. um, so I just split it there very naturally without even realizing it until after I said it. But and if you are emphasizing the not, then splitting it can become a little more likely, right? A little more common. But at no point is it necessarily um, bad sounding to do it one or the other, whether emphasizing or not. You can just emphasize the not before, or you can emphasize the not in the middle. Um, I would recommend putting not before because that's the standard. That's the most common, and you don't have to worry about it. But it is possible to put not or boldly or whatever else between to and the preposition. Um, and I would also add, because with the logic of the prepositions, I explained that the reason why the infinitive exists, which I'm not going to go into all the detail there, because it's kind of a long explanation. Watch the lesson or read the book if you haven't seen that yet. But um, some point in Middle English, because the preposition to is always about an endpoint, like a location or a point in time. And at some point in Middle English, probably subconsciously, and maybe because of the influence of French, um, native speakers of English started thinking about verbs, like the basic form of verbs, as an endpoint. Um, and so that's why we say to do, to go, to eat as the basic form. And then so there's a grammar rule around that you're not supposed to split that because it's supposed to be to do as like one piece. But if you actually look at the logic of prepositions and you realize that it's actually not one piece, like it usually is one chunk, it's usually treated as one chunk. Yes, that's perfectly fine. Like I want to go, that's fine. But it's actually I have a desire to what? Go. And so the preposition to in that case is actually like a bridge between my desire and the action I want to do. So technically, under the surface, they're not together, and so splitting them is perfectly fine, even though it's grammatically incorrect according to formal grammar rules. Um, and maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it would be completely incorrect. Maybe this is something that has changed. It's like in the final stage of changing or already completely at the stage of changing. And the grammar books say it's wrong, but the grammar books don't matter because some grammar books still say you shouldn't put a preposition at the end, and that's complete nonsense. Um, I would say that's wrong to say that. That's a rule because that's not a rule. Okay, Filippo, the word even is Eve plus n or Eve plus schwa plus n. Okay, good. Focus on your ears. Focus on your ears, not your eyes, right? Always, which I think you're doing that here, so that's good. Good question. But what do we hear? What do we hear? We hear E, we hear V, and then we hear, is it just an N? Even, even. See, there's no vowel there. It's actually possible to say it that way quickly, like um, even if. So you technically don't have to put the vowel in between the V and the N if you're speaking really quickly. But normally, E, V, even. Now I say it with which is another way to do it. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people will say it with a schwa. Even, even. It or are perfectly fine. They both sound neutral. But normally, if you're not speaking super, super quickly, there is supposed to be a little sound there. So you want to try to hear that little sound. It's a good question. Okay. Matt, can natives hear the difference between, oh God, I hate IPA. I really hate IPA. I think that's, see, I can't completely read IPA. Yes, no, it's k, then an incur? Oh, incur, maybe. And incur. Okay, so one has the one has the n. See, this is why I say the front end and the back end, or back end, yeah, programming. The front N and the back N. I think that is so much easier and better than the stupid IPA. Oh, and then you say for incur. Of course, yeah. See, I didn't finish it. I should really finish reading before I get caught in the details. I always do that. Yeah. So the word is incur. Can natives hear the difference? Incur, 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 incur. If we're not paying attention, I would say no. If we're paying very close attention, perhaps. But look at this. So, okay, the sound, the back end. This, right? If we say sing, okay, that's fine. That's there. Yeah, you never finish reading the sentence. I know that's my bad habit. That's fine. Now, if we say right, this is well, I say it e. If I say it the way other people say it, sing with an a sound. Okay, sing, and then there's sin with an n. Right now, we'll definitely hear the difference between that, between the and the n. Sing, sin. Um, what's happening in the word incur? Okay, number one, because of the cut back here, it's going to make it really, really difficult to do an n up here. But even if we were to do the n here and then do the k, it's just extremely unlikely that we would do it that way in the first place. Not necessarily because it's more difficult, but because if you have a normal N and then you have a K sound after it, or you have a G sound after it, not as in sing, which doesn't have a G, it doesn't have a G, it's just part of the spelling, but it has an actual G. Like, for example, what was that one example? Okay, no, see, it depends. If we say, for example, danger, so this is J, spelled with a G, but it's not a G, it's a J. So we're going to go up here because the J is around here, danger, right? But if I say anger, okay, this is right. It's not like anger. Well, I guess you could look at it that way. I look at it like this. Um, there was another example. That wasn't the best one. Oh, I can't think of it right now. There was a perfect example that illustrated this point. I can't think of it, but anyway, sometimes we'll have a normal n, and then if say like one version of a word would just be a normal n, and then say like the other version or a different word that's pronounced almost exactly the same, spelled almost exactly the same, but there's like a k after it. We'll actually change that normal n back here, even though it's supposed to be up here. And that's kind of what's happening with incur, because it's or actually, yeah, that was a good example. In current news, right? If I say in current news, this is a perfect example here. Now this is a linking, right? That's happening, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be inside of a word. Normally, in is up here. We don't do back here. Ing, no. In. Now the K sound in current is back here. So we could say in current, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. You could do it that way. But we're very likely to actually change this n to this n. That's why I call them two n's, partially because of this. And we'll say in current news. So in the word incur, that's all that's really happening. It's supposed to be in, but then there's the incur, and so we're switching from the front end to the back end. Instead of doing a front end, we're just saying incur, because it's easier to do that way. So that's what's really happening there. And in this particular word, can we hear the difference? As I said, if we're not paying attention, probably not. Um, but because it's so likely that we go back here, if you try to like forcefully do it up here, like incur, it's probably going to sound a little bit out of place because you have to take that extra effort to really make sure that N is there, and we just don't usually do that. So Einstein's, I prefer using not to because I heard this way a lot, but I hear the other occasionally. Yeah, as I was saying, so not to do, the not is by default most commonly it's going to go before the to and then the verb. So that's why I recommend you just use that and don't worry about the other version. If you hear the other version, then just know that it exists. You don't have to actually use it. The splitting version you don't have to use. Um, have you ever? Okay, let's. Glad I didn't read that out loud. Let's see which one here. Let's see this one. Okay, and I have to do this 3 times. That's fun. So I know that was publicly visible. I don't know why YouTube didn't catch that in the filter. Sorry, I didn't catch that sooner because I was explaining things, and that's how I usually work my way through the chat. But that was disturbing, and now that person is gone. So moving on. Okay, we're at 2:11. Okay, we got about 20 minutes left, guys. More questions, more questions. I hear the other occasionally. Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay. Yeah, so Einstein's, when you say because I heard this way a lot, that's technically okay. But if you meant hear, then I mean, yeah, that's fine. You normally hear it that way a lot. I see. At first, I was like, "Why are you making that correction?" I was like, "Oh, because you meant to say hear instead of heard." But heard works. Um, he used a different font. Ah, interesting. So the trolls are getting wise to the algorithm, I guess. I don't know if that would be the algorithm. I guess it's just the programming. I hate trolls. I got my first troll several weeks ago, which was fun. And then today, actually, I think it was like one of the first comments. Yeah, it was like the first comment in today's stream was a troll trying to get me to say the N word. And I immediately reported them. And then this person, so this is my first time getting 2 trolls in one stream. That's interesting. I'm definitely gaining more attention. So I guess that's good. But I don't know how somebody can be so I don't want to say it, so lacking in themselves that they have to do things like that. Like, you know, I'm more sad than mad because apparently that person is very much suffering and they're trapped in a mental prison of some sort and causes them to do things like that. So here we are. Hopefully their situation improves. But anything else? Anything else? I think I exhausted the comments from the last week. Oh no, there's one thing that I can also talk about, and this is a really good question. I've gotten a couple questions about this. Thanks for listening. I think I have to call it a day now. Okay, well, thanks for stopping by, Matt. Good to see you, and have a good time until next week or whenever I see you again. Um, so somebody recently asked about the placement, like how to do the dental T and D, which is again is a variation, not informal. It's a normal variation of the TH sounds. Um, the D goes with the voiced TH, the T goes with the voiceless TH. And I call it dental, and I put it in parentheses because you don't have to actually touch your teeth. I call it that because it's an easy thing to call it, and that's what Spanish has, so that's my reference for it. But also because that's the easiest way to do it. But strictly speaking, you actually don't have to touch the teeth. And so I've gotten a couple questions about this because they weren't sure, like, okay, well, the normal T and D is up here, you don't touch the teeth. But for this dental version, you can't do a normal T or D for the TH because it's going to sound very, very, very informal. It's going to sound uneducated. And I mean, if you want to speak that way, there are people who speak that way. It's okay, but you know, you need to be aware of these things. I don't speak that way. Most Americans don't speak that way. So, um, if you're going to do the dental T or D, which is like the or the instead of the or th, um, the easiest way is to just put the tongue flat on the teeth, right? You can even kind of see the tongue a bit. The, okay, or t, and that's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. You don't want to push out too hard because it's not supposed to be. It's not actually supposed to be like a T or D sound, but it works very very similarly to the Spanish T and T. Now, instead of putting it flat there, you could still be up here and not touching the teeth, but this is where it's a little harder. Okay. And there's no sliding. You could slide it from here to here, then that's okay, but that's not required. What you want to do is normally the T and D, it's not like t and d, it's not straight up. The tip is a little bit flat, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit flat. So it's not t, d, right? That's like straight up. It's t, Duh. So the tongue is going to be a little bit angled, a bit, not like this, a little bit angled. This is normal T and D, right? You're just going to be just a tiny bit flat with your tongue. T, duh. Okay, no touching the teeth. If you do the dental T or D for the TH sound, um, if you don't put it on your teeth, which you could also have it sort of like partially on your teeth, that's okay, it's fine too. But if you do it up here, which is also possible, you want it to be a little bit flatter. And you want to use maybe a third to two-thirds of the front of your tongue. So instead of just okay, and you're going to make that flat, and that's going to dull or flatten the T and D sound compared to the normal actual real T and D in English. So instead of t, which sounds very crisp and clear, t, it's going to be a little bit flatter. T, 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 right? So instead of saying, I don't know, think, I can say think, think, right? Perfectly fine. Or if I do the D, instead of saying this, I can say this. So it's not a normal D. It's not t and d, not this. It's a little flatter. And I haven't really mentioned that yet because although it's possible, I think it maybe makes it a little more confusing. It sounds a little bit too much like the normal T and D, and it can confuse you. But because I've gotten some questions about it, I figured that I might as well bring that up. But the easy way is just to put it on your teeth, right? It's not a big deal, and that's also going to make it sound just a little bit less like a normal T and D, so you can actually hear the difference a bit better too. Okay, anything else, guys? Well, out on the comments. I don't know what else to talk about here. Oh, I'm tired. Still have to post a thing on eBay too. And the ear trainer is coming along really well. If I can talk about that a little bit. I wish I could show you my screen, but I'm just using the webcam. Thanks for the lesson. No problem. Thanks for coming. Looks like things are going to end up winding down anyway, but we can still got about 10 minutes. I'll talk about the ear trainer here. So I posted a shot about the regular ear trainer, or not the regular, the starting screen for the ear trainer, and that looked great, but it didn't do anything because I didn't program any functionality into it. So what I've been doing now, I've been trying to get the basic buttons working. So now when you click start, did I have the start button on that in that image? Yeah, I did. When you click start, that window will disappear and a new window will pop up. And that window is the ear trainer itself. And I have 3 other buttons, which is go back, replay sound, and check answer. And right now I have it to where the go back button, it'll make that window disappear and the other window come back. And so I have that working where it'll go back and forth between the windows. So that's good. But that's all I have so far. I need to figure out how to add the audio in. I need to figure out how to attach the checked buttons to the particular audio files and how they load into the other screen. That's going to be the really hard part. But step by step, it's getting there. So this was my first month. We're almost at the end of the month. And I spent my first 2 weeks or so figuring out a glitch with my programming map. So I've been trying to work on the ear trainer, a little bit every day, and we're going pretty good. But I'm already 1 month down. So my original plan was 3 months. I think I can finish it in another 2 months, but we'll see. If not, I'll extend it to 6, and we'll see. But this is, this mission, it's good for the project, but it's not necessarily one of my normal learning projects that I would start at the root, because I'm not starting at the root with this. I am technically, but I'm not doing it the way that I would normally do it, like say like the pronunciation in a language. I'm kind of just like diving in to the actual code, and I don't know. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's going to come out pretty well. Okay, well, we're pretty much out of time. We don't seem to have any other questions. So, done 4 people here. So last chance to ask a question. No questions. Make sure we didn't have any other trolls I missed. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything, so I think we got another person. So if there's no other questions, then I am going to go. I'll wrap up this live stream. I still have a lot to do today, unfortunately. I'm almost done with the extra practice for the W sound. I don't know how many people are looking forward to that, but that's coming. I'm trying to work on the preposition in when I can, but I got so much to do, guys, literally. Like I have 4 main things that I'm working on, 3 or 4 main things I'm working on every day, and I'm just like, I'm dying. Okay, so thank you all very much for watching and coming and asking questions. I will see you next week, same day. I don't know the exact time. I'll figure that out, but same day. So thank you all and see you later.